Welcome to the season 2 of the India Energy Hour podcast. The India Energy Hour podcast explores the most pressing hurdles and promising opportunities of India's energy transition through an in-depth discussion on policies, financial markets, social movements, and science. The podcast is hosted by energy transition researcher and author Dr. Sandeep Pai and senior energy and climate journalist Shreya Jay. The show is produced by multimedia journalist Tejas Dayananda Sagar.
If India wants to achieve its net zero goal by 2070, energy storage technologies will have to play a crucial role. From battery to pump storage, several different technologies are now commercially available in 5 countries and several others are at the R&D stage. They would all need to be deployed at a scale several magnitudes higher than today as India embarks on the path of the energy transition. And this would require policy push, financial backing, and reconciling with socio-economic issues. To understand the landscape of energy storage technologies and their future in India, we interviewed Dr. Rahul Walawalkar, President and Managing Director of Customized Energy Solutions India Private Limited. Rahul is also the founder and Executive Director for India Energy Storage Alliance. Rahul is considered India's foremost expert on energy storage, energy management, smart grid deployment, and much more.
Hello, Dr. Rahul. Thank you so much for joining us at the India Energy Hour today. We are delighted to have you with us. Energy storage is one subject that needs a very deeper understanding, given that it's so nascent for the Indian market. So glad to have you with us to explain this market, to talk about the nitty-gritties in terms of policies, market, global examples, etc. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much, Shreya, for hosting us and bringing attention to this topic.
First of all, want our audience to know about you, your professional journey. Where are you from? What did you study? And how did you land up? How did you decide that energy storage is the field? What made you passionate about it? So can you just tell us?
So I grew up in Mumbai, and my neighbor, Mr. Madhusudan Murthy, was an electrical engineer and had his own company, Power Engineers. So throughout my school days, I did a lot of projects with him, and I guess somehow inspired by him, I had decided to get into electrical engineering. And I did my electrical engineering from Walchand College of Engineering, Sangli. And then ended up getting into IT side with Tata Infotech, where although I joined as a Y2K programmer, I was able to actually initiate certain in-house projects on energy management. And at age of 21, I was made in charge of all over India, managing energy management for Tata Infotech all over India. Later on, I ended up also developing a software called EcoLumen, energy efficient lighting design software, and then actually set up a group called iGEMS, Idea Generation Evaluation and Mentoring System, with a goal of institutionalizing innovation. So that has been my journey where, again, by training, I was always interested in energy and especially electrical energy in particular. And then with my experience at Tata Infotech, I got introduced into the innovation and entrepreneurship. And I was able to marry both of these when I moved to US in 2001, did my master's in energy management. And then in 2004, I joined Customized Energy Solutions, a small consulting company based out of Philadelphia, where I was a 5th employee. Simultaneously, I was able to do my PhD at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, where I did my research focusing on economics of demand response and energy storage technologies in electricity markets. And when I finished my PhD, I realized that there were a lot of energy storage technologies which were just getting commercialized, but most of the technology developers did not understand about electricity markets or the real business cases. And that's where we created emerging technology as a practice and started working with various early stage technology development companies and bring in the expertise of customized energy solutions of understanding electricity markets and related rules and regulations. And it has been a journey now for almost last 15 years. have worked with more than 200 companies across the value chain around emerging technologies in smart grid, microgrid, energy storage, and e-mobility area. So happy to continue that. In 2010, I moved back to India to start India operation of customized energy solutions. And that time we realized that there was hardly any understanding about the pace at which energy storage technologies were evolving globally. The most of the discussion was around just lead acid batteries and pumped hydro, and many of the new technologies which are coming in or the business models which are coming in, there was a lack of awareness. So that's where in 2012 we created India Energy Storage Alliance with just 5 member companies, which has now grown into a very strong alliance with more than 160 members from almost 15 different countries, and have contributed to development of many of the key policies in India over last decade through India Energy Storage Alliance.
I'm very intrigued about one question, which is like, you have done academia, you went to Carnegie Mellon, finished your PhD. How was that transition from, being an academic, trying to publish papers, to working and actually working with policy? So, doing more applied work. I'd be very curious, and I think a lot of our listeners would also be very curious of how that transition was. Was it difficult or easy?
So for me, it was not that I went into PhD to become academic. In fact, my journey was in a different way. When I actually did my undergrad, I did not even have plans for going for masters. So I was one of those few students who did not even apply for GATE or GRE, anything. I was very clear. I was happy to get out of my undergrad and get into the real working life. But then when I started working in Tata Infotech, I started realizing, especially when I developed the Ecolumen product and I was being seen as one of the top experts on energy management in India, I felt that to justify that and the opportunities I was getting for influencing many of the energy management related discussions, I felt that I needed to study a little bit more and upgrade my knowledge. That's why I went to US. Even that time, my plan was to just get my master's in a year and return back and develop a full-fledged online product suite related to energy management and tie it up with e-commerce. So those type of plans were there. But while I was doing my master's education, I met with many family friends and other seniors who knew that I also had an inclination on working on the policy side. And they actually suggested that if I really wanted to get impact on the policy side, I cannot return back just with a master's. They said that just to get an entry into some of the policy think tanks or the policy circles, it would be very important to get a PhD from a top 10 university. So I went into my PhD program purely as a necessity where, okay, I said that, okay, I am very passionate about this area. I wanted to work so that people listen to me. I better equip myself. But the CME program was actually amazing. It's one of the, I think, 3 or 4 programs, which is a interdisciplinary programs between Carnegie Institute of Technology, Heinz School of Public Policy, and Taper School of Business. So you have to learn enough about all 3 areas, and basically we will end up becoming a specialist in connecting the dots. So that has been quite influential in terms of all the work which I have done in last 15 years. So I was very happy that I got into this program with a very narrow objective, but actually it ended up opening up my thinking and has helped me quite a lot in terms of the work I have done in last 15 years.
Wonderful. We can get into the topic now. I think there's so much to discuss there. So I will start with, a very basic question, which because a lot of our listeners may not be very familiar with everything. So, what are some of the most promising technologies emerging globally and in India when it comes to energy storage? Of these, which technologies would be most prominent in India?
Sure. So with energy storage, again, energy storage as a sector is not new. We always had some form of energy storage. If you see, pumped hydro is one of the oldest form of energy storage, where you store the energy in form of the potential energy in 2 dams, one sort of at upper reservoir and one at a lower reservoir, and then use that where for storing energy you pump the water to the upper reservoir, and for generating electricity you release the water. In terms of electrochemical chemistries, also have been around for more than 200 years. Especially lead acid batteries have been around as a dominant technology for more than 100 years now. There are other forms of chemistries like nickel cadmium batteries or nickel metal hydride batteries, which have been used for consumer electronics or power UPS and backup systems. But especially in last 15 years, perhaps lithium ion batteries have emerged as the most dominant source, because originally they started again with more of a consumer electronics side with camcorder and related or power tools kind of application. But as the technology started scaling up and as the prices started coming up, more and more applications have been enabled by these technologies. And in last, for example, in maybe around 15 years back, around the globe, there was less than maybe 10 or 15 gigawatt hour of annual production capacity for lithium ion batteries, which have grown now to almost more than 500 gigawatt hour of manufacture annual production capacity, and it is expected to grow to almost around 3000 gigawatt hour of annual production capacity by end of this decade. So that way, I think lithium ion batteries have been the most dominant technologies in the recent time. Within lithium ion batteries, there are almost 5 or 6 different type of batteries, where you have lithium iron phosphate as one chemistry, lithium nickel manganese cobalt as another chemistry, or there are other form of chemistries with slight different variations, but these two are perhaps the most dominant chemistries which are being used. There is also a lot of work happening on looking at long duration energy storage, because as we are getting towards more and more renewables, there is a requirement that we may need like 6 hour, 10 hour, or even longer duration energy storage technologies, where metal air technologies, flow batteries, or other forms of storage technologies are being seen as a promising technologies, but it may take another maybe 5 6 years for those technologies to commercialize. There is also work happening within lithium ion batteries in terms of replacing the liquid electrolyte, which also sometimes is a cause for some of the fires which happen with lithium ion batteries with solid state electrolyte. So that is one direction where you hear solid state batteries. Mostly people are talking about still lithium ion batteries, but with the solid electrolyte. And then there are the technologies like sodium ion batteries, which are being seen as another sort of flavor of upcoming batteries, where instead of having lithium ion as a main source of energy transfer, you are looking at using sodium ion, which can eliminate some of the challenges related to the raw materials for lithium ion batteries. But a lot of these changes and these technologies take 10 to 20 years for commercialization. So right now, lithium ion chemistries are the ones which are dominating in terms of becoming a leading technology. At the same time, we are working on multiple electrochemical technologies, as well as there are even mechanical and other form of storage technologies, including gravity storage without water. So even like moving rocks up and down. And so there are a lot of innovative ways people are looking at alternate forms of energy storage technologies.
I have a quick follow up and then I will leave to Shreya. So, as I understand, like lithium ion is sort of the most commercial sort of technology for storage. So, if that is the case, could you give us a sense of what is the cost when, if I want 24/7 power in India right now, and with solar, wind, maybe hybrid plus storage, if I want that, how would that compare when you say compare with thermal or even the lowest bid of solar? So it'd be nice to understand the price points.
When you are talking about price, I think you are talking about in terms of the end use price, in terms of the levelized cost of the energy. So right now, what happens is, like, if you see from end user perspective, right now residential customers pay tariff of anywhere between 3 rupees to 5 rupees, 6 rupees, depending on how much energy they are consuming. The industrial customers, typically depending on which state you're operating, you pay price of anywhere between 6 rupee to 8 rupee, and commercial customers pay tariff of somewhere around 8 rupees to 12 rupees. So solar energy has now come down, where most of the time you hear these bid prices of around 2.5 rupees, or maybe 3 rupees. So definitely under 3 rupees, so between 2 to 3 rupees. But that is just cost of the generation of the solar energy. In terms of the delivered cost to the customer, solar energy still costs customers anywhere from 5 rupees to 6 rupees, depending on which state they are in and what all subsidies or charges they are subjected to pay for getting the energy delivered. Now, if you sort of add storage for say around 4 hours, then what is happening is you are not storing all the 100% energy and shifting it at night, right? So then you end up using around say 70% of the solar energy which you are generating as it is, and then you are storing part of the energy and using it to complement meet your evening peak load when sun is not shining, or your morning load. In that case, you can get as a levelized tariff of again somewhere around 7 to 8 rupee, which is still cheaper than the commercial and industrial tariffs which most of the customers are paying. So having 4 hour kind of a storage is becoming viable right now. But if you want to do 24 by 7, then the prices start increasing. And typically in that case, you need to actually look at solar plus wind plus storage as a hybrid, because then what you can do it is you can still use like 4 to 6 hour kind of a storage, store excess solar energy during the day, use it in the evening, and then again at night use maybe wind energy to recharge the storage and then use it in the morning. So if you do that, then you can achieve again the tariff of under 8 rupees. And again, I'm talking about the complete delivered tariff. If you are just looking at the generation tariff, then a couple of years back, Solar Energy Corporation had issued a tender where they looked at basically 6 hour of peaking energy guarantee outside the regular renewable energy hours, where they said like in the evening 4 hours and morning 2 hours, and that just as an energy tariff was around 4 rupee 30 paise, was a winning bid from Greenco with pumped hydro, and around 4 rupees 60 paise was a bid from Renew Power using batteries. So again, it's under 5 rupees, but that is just the energy. You add additional 2-3 rupees in terms of the transmission and distribution charges. So the delivered tariff will come to around 8 rupees.
Yeah, thank you for that. And good, you mentioned about renewable energy and round the clock power. And I've been meaning to ask, in terms of whatever focus has been on solar and wind energy during the past decade has been phenomenal. There has been exponential growth in terms of deployment of these resources. It's that storage has been become a policy talk point very recently. Can you explain that are batteries now a focus of the policies? And if they are, is the government encouraging more research, more policy development into storage technologies? And would we see a similar growth trajectory of battery storage like solar did?
No, so in fact, there has been a lot of work which has happened in last around 7-8 years. So the first time government started looking into storage was almost back in 2013-14, when a first task force was set up for looking at large scale renewable integration. And that was a time when government realized that just using pumped hydro as a storage mechanism may not work. And in 2014, Dr. Satish Agnihotri, who was then the secretary of MNRE, ended up creating a standing committee on energy storage to start looking at storage. In 2015-16, an initial roadmap for energy storage was developed. And then subsequently in 2018, National Energy Storage Mission was also drafted by MNRE, which ended up then integrated with the National Mission for Transformative Mobility by Niti Aayog, and that ended up creating this PLI for battery manufacturing. So there has been a lot of work which has been happening behind the scene, particularly 5 to 6 years, where Central Electricity Regulatory Commission has removed a lot of barriers which prevented storage technologies, where now you can have standalone storage projects are allowed, where storage can act as a generation or load, and those flexibilities are provided. There are still some, in fact, even CERC has now allowed storage technologies to also provide ancillary services, although there is still some work which is required where the ancillary service definition is not sort of refined enough to really value the fast response capability of energy storage. Right now, the ancillary service definitions are more geared for making sure that thermal plants can provide those ancillary services with like 10-minute or 15-minute kind of a response time, whereas storage technologies can respond in millisecond time. But right now, there is no mechanism for valuing that. So there is still a lot of work which is required on that. But I would say that I think India has been taking sort of a steady steps in the right direction with CA, CERC, as well as MNRE, MOP, and Niti Aayog playing a key role. In terms of the R&D, Department of Science and Technology has actually a number of programs where, in fact, led by the India's Department of Science and Technology, Mission Innovation, which is an intergovernmental R&D program covering almost 35 countries, ended up 2020-21 as a year for energy storage. And there are more than 35 R&D projects happening between Indian entities with various multinational R&D centers. There is also a lot of funding being provided to national institutes such as IITs, Central Electricity Regulatory Agencies like SECRI or IESA in Pune or CMET in Pune, Center for Materials for Electronics Technology. So all of these institutes have got somewhere between 10 crore to 100 crore to set up various labs for that. One area where we are still trying to work on is to try to improve the R&D, which is more commercially oriented, because right now there is a lot of R&D which is happening, which is in the academic side. Unfortunately, when we are looking at technologies for, say, manufacturing, there is nothing which is coming out of India which is commercial grade right now, and there is a significant lag in terms of the kind of materials which are being developed versus the materials which are currently going into commercial grade batteries. So that's the area where we as IESA have taken an initiative, and last year we floated India Battery Supply Chain Council to bring in focus right from the material side research. And in fact, end of this month, we are launching 10 fellowships with the Department of Science and Technology for encouraging postdoctoral students to work on industry-led research problems so that there is a better chance of the research leading to commercial adoption.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I want to pull you in the direction of PLI. I think PLI has, often sort of is become a lever to promote new technology. So I was wondering, can you explain a bit about how will PLI work in the space of storage and which sectors will benefit? Will EV also benefit from PLI?
Yes, definitely. In fact, the way the PLI happened was that in 2016, actually, as the IESA, we initiated a dialogue with Niti Aayog to request for specific policies for supporting advanced energy storage manufacturing in India. That time, Niti Aayog was working on an electronic manufacturing policy, and Mr. Anil Jain, who was a energy advisor at that time at Niti Aayog, ended up taking interest, and we started work on that. And this ended up later on getting converted into the Advanced Chemistry Cell PLI, which was one of the first PLIs drafted by Niti Aayog. It has played an instrumental role because when we first started talking about setting up manufacturing in India, most of the companies in India were looking at setting up manufacturing only at like a gigawatt hour scale or below gigawatt hour scale. But based on the international experience, it was very clear that if you have to set up a commercially viable manufacturing, then scale is very important. And back then in 2017-18, like around 3 to 5 gigawatt hour was a minimum size which was required. At least that was the feedback what we were getting from most of the international partners. And then by now, actually, it has become like almost 20 or higher gigawatt hour capacity has become sort of a minimum capacity which most of the new gigafactories are getting set up. So under PLI, basically government encouraged that minimum capacity required was 5 gigawatt hour and up to 20 gigawatt hour incentives can be obtained under the PLI program. And that has catalyzed the market quite a lot. So right now there are almost more than 10 companies who are in process of setting up gigafactories in India, out of which 4 will get incentive from the government. But irrespective of that, there are other companies who are also stepping up and getting involved in setting up additional gigafactories in India. We are even hoping that there may be an extension of the PLI for supporting some of these other companies, because still India develops a complete supply chain for the gigafactory manufacturing. We expect that the Indian manufacturers may have a $10 to $15 kind of a disadvantage against some of the gigafactories which are already operating in China. So to support that, there will be some tariff protection as well as some cash incentive, which may be required for next 3 to 5 years. But after that, we expect that the Indian gigafactories will be able to stand alone on its own and then grow. As IESA, we have set a vision for actually getting to 500 gigawatt hour manufacturing, domestic manufacturing by 2035. So that's a scale at which we are looking at. And where we are most excited about is that right now, almost 90% of the supply chain for the current gigafactories is controlled by China. And we are seeing now a strong interest from Europe as well as from US in try to sort of decouple or the dependence on China as a single source, because COVID showed that to the world for so many other industries, where if you are just dependent on one country for your complete raw material or process material supply chain, then that is a recipe for disaster. And right now, most of the countries are looking for having at least one alternative, if not two alternatives to China in the supply chain. And that's another opportunity we have where India is a very strong industry in terms of the chemical processing industry. There are many companies in the pharmaceutical area or other areas are already dealing with lots of salts or other materials which are used in the battery manufacturing. And we are now seeing that many of these companies are now stepping up and looking at not just becoming supplier for Indian gigafactories, but they are also trying to become supplier for some of the international gigafactories. And that's an exciting development in the last 1 year.
I wanted to ask about the import ecosystem, and I'll here draw the parallel with the solar power manufacturing industry in the country. You correct me if I'm wrong. The way solar power generation or capacity addition grew, manufacturing did not catch up much. There have been a lot of blame game. Industries say that government did not give policy support. Government says that domestic manufacturers could not scale up. And in between of this, our country's solar power capacity continues to be heavily dependent on China. It's now that we are talking about manufacturing. There is obviously a suspicion in the market that battery storage technologies could go the same trajectory, where though we are talking about big, huge numbers in terms of deploying indigenous technologies, and there's PLI announced, and obviously there's a demand both in terms of solar, renewables, and electric mobility, but there's no domestic capacity to support that, and we continue to be import dependent, and that in turn impacts a lot of prices at Indian level, and hence the storage is not taking up at a level that one would envisage it to be. What do you think about this? Do you think that the jinx of Chinese manufacturing will not be with storage like it was with solar? And why do you think it would be different this time, if it would be?
So it's interesting to see actually many of the sort of these think tanks to come up with and claiming that, oh, India manufacturing will be cheaper than China and we need to promote India manufacturing. The whole reason why actually China has become the global supply chain for a lot of these products is because China is actually manufacturing at a scale where it has become the cheapest source. That's where most of the countries have lost their domestic manufacturing to China. And in solar, clearly, again, when I think the National Solar Mission was launched, we are looking at solar energy prices of almost around 15 rupee per kilowatt hour. So the focus from government side was just on trying to drive down the prices. And that's where, unfortunately, I think we missed out the boat on the solar manufacturing, although right now there is a separate PLI for solar and we'll see how effective that becomes. But I would say that with solar, we are almost 10 years back. Whereas with batteries, we are late, but we are perhaps maybe 3 to 5 year late, not 10-year late. So there is a possibility to catch up, especially because the chemistry and the technologies and the manufacturing process are also changing. So again, I really hate that we have lost the last 3 years, especially last 2 years with the COVID, because this entire PLI was supposed to have started in 2020 with manufacturing commencing in India in 2022. In fact, the original vision document, what IESA had submitted in 2016, we had requested the target to be setting up 20 gigawatt hour of domestic manufacturing by 2020. Now, if you can just imagine India having 20 gigawatt hour of domestic cell manufacturing capability at the start of the COVID, lot of investments which poured into Europe or US for gigafactories, actually we would have been able to scale up those manufacturing in India. But because India just did not have anything and everyone was waiting for PLI to come out, we ended up actually losing out, and a lot of those investment ended up going into other countries. But I think it's still not too late, and but we have to be patient. This manufacturing is something where setting up the manufacturing itself is going to take almost 2 years, right? It's not something which will happen overnight. Right now, with the kind of global race for gigafactories, some of the manufacturing equipment, delivery time itself has gone up from 6 months to almost 12 to 18 months. So it is going to take at least 2 years for setting up of many of these gigafactories, and then typically it takes 6 months to 12 months for stabilizing the process and getting the production to the full capacity. So from that point of view, we do expect sometime in 2024-25 will be the domestic production will start coming in. Although many of the companies who have won the gigafactory bids under PLI are using it for their internal consumption, like companies like Ola or Reliance have already announced that most of their production, or even Mahindra is now the third one, which is getting 5 gigawatt hour capacity. So all three of those will be primarily have mentioned that they will be using their production for their own internal consumption. That would mean that yes, rest of the customers will still have to depend on the imported cells unless government increases the PLI capacity and some of the other gigafactories come in. Then we can see more domestic supply for meeting both the EV as well as stationary demand.
Okay, I have one more question. I want to push you a little bit on this China competition with China question. Now, one of the things is, with the whole energy transition, like you need all these critical minerals, and a lot of that, I mean, produced anywhere, but most of them are processed in China because they have built that end to end. And then they also use those materials to manufacture from solar panels to everything else. Since they have built such a huge like supply chain end to end, even if India does something well domestically in terms of like deployment of storage technologies, how is it going to compete and go and grab all those mines? And it seems like a much larger challenge, isn't it? Can you elaborate a bit more on how does India go about creating this end to end supply chain so that even in the long run India is not dependent on other countries?
So again, this is a very important question, and this is a question where basically it is not about just India, right? As I mentioned, like right now, global manufacturing annual production is around 500, 600 gigawatt hour, around 1,000 gigawatt hour installed capacity is there right now. And it is expected to go to 3,000 gigawatt hour. So we are talking about securing supply for 50 or 100 gigawatt hour kind of a manufacturing, whereas the rest of the world is struggling about how to get access to the supply chain for supporting additional 2,000 gigawatt hour of manufacturing. So a lot of investments are happening in that area. Obviously, if Indian companies want to secure the supply chain, then we need to work with partners. For example, Australia has emerged as one critical partner. We as IESA have signed a MOU with Future Battery Industry Critical Research Consortium from Australia, as well as we are working very closely with Austrade as well as the Western Australia government in terms of promoting ties between Indian companies and Australia. We are also, in fact, as a customized energy solutions, we have recently done some work for World Bank in looking at the battery mineral supply chain in South Africa. And as part of that, also, we have identified certain opportunities for India to work with South Africa. Similarly, I think there is opportunities to collaborate with some of the countries in the Latin America area. Already Indian government has created an entity called Kabil, which is for exploration of minerals critical for EV and storage area. And they have already signed MOUs with Argentina government as well as Bolivia government for exploring some of these minerals and maybe investing into mines in these areas. So yes, this is a very, very big challenge. But right now, these are the challenges which are being handled by individual companies. If you see some of the big players like Apple or Volkswagen or others, these are companies are directly going and actually securing these mines. So this is not something which is not possible or it is impossible. This is something which is very much possible, and the scale at which the companies are now coming into this play, where we are seeing now people like Reliance and Tatas and others are coming in. I'm pretty sure that the large Indian companies also have the ability to secure these supply chains. But yeah, we cannot waste any more time. I think next maybe 12 to 24 months are going to be very critical. And some of this mining project development may take anywhere from 2 years to 5 years time, right? So you need to have that type of a vision and that type of a foresight in terms of securing this access to the raw materials. And the key thing, as you said, is the processing ability. I think raw material itself is not a very big issue. There are many locations where raw materials are available. The bottlenecks are actually becoming in terms of processing of those materials. And that's the area where, apart from the gigafactory investments, we need to ensure that the investments are happening in the rest of the supply chain. And I'm personally pleasantly surprised with the kind of response what we are getting in India. There are many companies like Epsilon Carbon, Gujarat Fluorochemicals, and others who have stepped up in a very big way, and they are showing a very good appetite for becoming a global supplier. So I'm pretty confident right now that we will be able to solve this challenge. But again, I don't want to undermine the challenge. It is going to be a tough area. We need to have a lot of work happening between private sector, government agencies, as well as international partners. But the good part is, I think we are seeing, at least as the IESA, very strong interest even from other countries in these type of collaborations. We are seeing interest from Korea, US, as well as Europe in exploring such collaborations with India. So a lot of, I think, positive opportunities are there. And if we sort of focus on it, I am pretty sure we can capture that. And it's not that we are trying to replace China, right? That's what something I want everyone to be clear. You cannot right now compete with China. If anyone is thinking that, oh, just because we have some big announcement, we will start doing that, they are in a complete dreamland and far away from it. The only thing is the market is growing so fast that even China has to do a lot of new things, right? So China has to go from 1000 gigawatt hour to additional next 2000 gigawatt hour. And they may actually do out of the next 2000 gigawatt hour, maybe 1000 gigawatt hour. But remaining 1000 gigawatt hour, which will get split between US, Europe, India, and other Southeast Asia, we can easily target like few hundred gigawatt hour kind of a manufacturing in that. So I don't think we are replacing China or anything like that is happening. By the time we get to 100 gigawatt hour, China will be almost 2000 gigawatt hour. So that scale and difference will still remain. We have to work much harder to try to really catch up on that.
I have a further question on lithium. It's a two-part question. One is for academic purposes, that in terms of comparison, how do you compare China and India in terms of lithium ownership? Or, for example, who are the top 5 lithium owners in the world? I'm sure China leads the pack, but where does India stands in comparison? If you can share some stats on that. And second, my question is, would lithium ownership be the next geopolitical issue like oil fields are right now? Maybe not 10 years or 15 years, sometime down the line, because it is becoming a geopolitical issue. The way China is accelerating its ownership of lithium mines across the world, it does look like they want to have the mainstay in that. Your comment on it?
So one thing I would just like to clarify is that a lot of time it gets positioned as a lithium availability, but in lithium ion batteries, actually lithium is only one of the maybe 7 or 8 critical materials which is required, right? Unlike in lead acid battery, where almost 70-80% of the weight of the battery is lead, and if you secure lead, then you're done. With lithium ion batteries, you're looking for lithium, you're looking for, depending on the cathode chemistry.
No, sure. By lithium, I meant ownership of critical minerals. Let me rephrase the whole question. Critical minerals.
Yeah. So you are looking for nickel, manganese, cobalt, and many other minerals, including copper and aluminium, which is also critical supply chain constraint. I'm not from point of view of raw material, but from the quality of the very fine thickness electrodes which are required. So those type of bottlenecks are there. In terms of raw material availability, if you see, actually Australia almost right now is supplying 50% of many of the minerals in this area. There is something like cobalt where Africa, particularly Congo or surrounding areas, are controlling more than 50% of the raw material availability. So that way, again, there is a raw material as a minerals are available around the globe. In fact, in India, we have done a research report along with WRI, which you can download from IESA website at indiaiesa.info, where we have actually shown that many of the critical minerals which are required for the battery supply chain do exist in India. It's just that India never paid attention to commercial exploration of those minerals. Many of these minerals were categorized under atomic mineral category, and there was actually a ban on exploration of those minerals. So that's something which has now changed in last 2 years, and some domestic raw material resources are also being found out. But it still will take time to determine if those are commercial grade and sufficient quality or not. But there are, again, I would say that especially in places like Australia, there are a lot of raw material reserves are available. Now the question is, can we go into form the right partnerships and invest into securing those access to those minerals 5 year, 10 year ahead of time? That's what is required.
Okay, awesome. Let's move on to another topic which I'm quite interested in is finance, right? When we are talking about these huge scales of both processing, capacity within the country, then from using those raw materials and creating gigafactories, etc. You need so much finance. Where do you see India able to capture this kind of finance? Because right now, when I mean, the comparison that always comes to mind is solar and wind, and a lot of it seems to be from domestic sources anyway. So, do you think India will be able to capture this kind of international finance and private equity and various other, instruments at that scale to compete with China?
So again, as I mentioned, we are not really competing at the scale at China's scale, right? Like, as I said, like China is looking at building 1,000 gigawatt hour plus manufacturing in next 5 6 years. We were looking at 100. So we are not looking at same scale investment as what China is doing. We are looking for maybe 10% of that. And based on what I'm seeing right now, I'm pretty confident that it is available both from domestic as well as lot of private equity interest we are seeing from US and Europe into this sector, because everyone is very clear that India is going to be in the top three markets, right? And now that there is a very clear government policy coming in for supporting manufacturing and other things, people are realizing that yes, India is the next destination. Although right now there is a lot of policy and financial support being provided for setting up manufacturing in Europe and US, most of these countries are very high cost in terms of setting up chemical processing and other related area. So from that point of view, I think again, forget about competing with China, but I feel very confidently that the investments coming in India can compete with investments happening in Europe or in US. And from that point of view, I think we have a very good chance of securing necessary financing. Right now, in fact, the gap which is there is more on the customer side of financing. What is happening right now is that there are a lot of applications where energy storage technologies at current prices are also cost effective. Unfortunately, because of lack of financing mechanism for the supporting those projects, we are not seeing those projects being developed right now. Like for example, as I mentioned, for commercial industrial customers, any customer who is using more than 500 hours of diesel per year is a very clear opportunity for replacing that with maybe solar, rooftop solar plus storage, and you can easily finance it with a 5 year kind of a payback, which is a very good opportunity for any financial institute. So those type of, I think, financing is something which is right now lacking. In terms of the investment side, right now I'm seeing pretty comfortable interest from the domestic corporates as well as other private equity players in supporting those.
Talking about the private sector, mobility would be a big game changer for the energy storage market, because that would be a huge demand driver. I wanted to get an understanding from you that have the petrol diesel lobby stopped their resistance towards electric mobility? Are you finally seeing a shift, or, have they come to terms with it, or there is still a resistance? Because a lot will depend on these key automakers for their shift towards EV for their plans, because that will drive the battery storage market in India.
Yeah. So I think there are some companies who are still resisting. Like classic example is the Maruti Suzuki. They are still resisting and trying to still focus on hybrids rather than focusing on completely pure electric. But I think around the world now the realization has come up that EVs is a path forward. At the same time, again, I don't think it is going to happen like overnight, right? For example, there are many customer segments in India who use vehicles for less than like 50 kilometer per day as a driving distance. For them, the economic decision to switch to EV may come another 5 years down the line. At the same time, many commercial vehicles or other users who are driving 100 kilometer or more per day, it's become no brainer that electric vehicle is a much better choice for that. And those are things will start happening sooner. What we are seeing it is, I think, especially I think Tata Motors, we have seen a big shift in the strategy, and I think they are reaping benefit of that. I think Mahindra also now with some of the management changes, I think they are, I think, revising their strategy towards EV and may come in a big way in next few years. So we do see some of the Indian players moving faster than others, but in terms of again the market, we are still talking about single digit market penetration for EVs, right? So that way, I don't think we need to have every manufacturer changing their position. It's just that I think every company has a right to go obsolete, right? You cannot force, like Nokia or others. They had a same opportunity as it was available for many of the other smartphone manufacturers, but they were again always with the innovator's dilemma. They were doing good with what they were selling, and they felt that the other market will not come fast enough, and ultimately Nokia ended up going bankrupt from being the number one company. So some of the companies, I'm pretty sure, they will have similar approach and they will realize it pretty late that they have missed out the opportunity. We are seeing that already in two-wheeler, right? When you talk about electric two-wheeler, which are the companies you are talking about? You are talking about Ather, Ola, or Hero Electric. You are not talking about, although Hero Motor Corp has invested in Ather, so that way they have hedged their bet, but you are not talking about TVS or Bajaj or Hero Motor Corp, which are the giants in terms of the IC engine. And right now, it may be fine. They may think that, oh, the market is very small and they can anytime catch up. But that's what happened in US, where companies like Ford and GM and Chrysler, they were always overconfident that, oh, Tesla is like a small startup and they will never be able to scale the manufacturing and we can decide to start manufacturing electric vehicles at any time. But the 10 years they gave Tesla as a head start, now it is almost impossible for any of the other manufacturers to catch up with them, right? We'll see if India's same story gets repeated or some of the players like Tata's and others are able to catch up much faster and still retain their relevance.
But isn't it a catch-22 situation? I'm not too sure about the market because the statistics seems to be different from all across. Is it not about the cost? Because these automobile makers are waiting for battery storage cost to come down, battery cost to come down. And there's so much of economic turmoil globally and so much manufacturing stalemate in China happens and prices spike. This is not the kind of surety that a automobile manufacturer who is manufacturing at that scale would like to depend on. So it's a catch-22 situation probably for them because the costs do not favor them. And second, obviously, is the charging infrastructure across the country, which is clearly not currently not in their hand, and also battery swapping policies, etc. So at my end, if I were to buy an EV, all of this looks like all over the place.
Sure. Again, that's what I said. Like, if you are thinking about EVs to replace all the IC engine vehicles, then we are far, far away from that. But if you start seeing like proper segmentation of the customers, there are many customers for whom it is not an issue. I think there is this big problem where there is this sort of a think tank process or the sort of the management process. Oh, that in India, less than 5% of the vehicles sold are more than 10 lakh and all the electric vehicles cost more than 10 lakh. So that's a wrong market and we have to wait for a 5 lakh electric vehicle to come in. See, what people don't realize is in India, when all the auto companies were not ready to introduce CNG vehicles, customers were smart enough where they said, hell with the companies, we will buy after the market CNG retrofit kits. We will buy those. We will wait in line for 5 hours, 10 hours to refill our CNG tank because the petroleum delivery companies were not ready to set up CNG stations. But customers understood that the economics is not about just the upfront cost. It is upfront cost plus running cost. And if you see the running cost of the electric vehicles, it is almost 1/10 of the petrol vehicles, right? So you need to think about what is a distance which the vehicle is expected to get driven in 5 year or 10-year kind of a time when the customer is owning it, and how much operating cost saving is possible with electric vehicle. And if you consider that, then it is just a question about financing. And the reason why some of the uptick is slow is because the EV financing and other thing is still again catching up. And that's why we have relatively lower market. But if companies are waiting for the battery prices to come down and start becoming cheaper than IC engine vehicle, then I think they are trying to solve a financing or business model problem with a technical solution where they are going to miss out on the opportunity. That's where you see, right, companies like Blue Smart or Lithium Caps and others, right? They ended up coming in and capturing market. In fact, some of them could have grown much faster if we had OEMs providing the right kind of electric vehicles. Like, for example, many of these companies needed an electric vehicle with a 200 to 250 kilometer driving range. Unfortunately, the Mahindra Electric and others vehicles which 3 years back they were trying to sell, which were the only vehicles available, had a driving range of 100, 120 kilometer and with air conditioning on less than 100 kilometer. So most of the time, these people have to wait for 5 hours, 6 hours during the day to recharge the batteries because they just did not have enough driving range available for what the customers were wanting. So I don't think there is any problem in terms of the capital cost. I think, as I said again, if you focus on the right customer segment, then the economics is so clear that it's not a question about market not being there. And we are seeing that with like Tata Nexon and other similar products coming into the market, right? They are able to capture the market in a much better way. And I think it is possible. So the way again I would say is that we are right now talking about like a low single digit penetration number, and the market is much bigger than that. It may not be 50% right now. It may take another 10 years to get the market to 50%. But that 5%, 10%, 20% kind of a market penetration, I think it's very easy to achieve.
Great, Rahul. This has been amazing. I have one last big picture sort of question. Like we talked about from tech to, policies to current policies to past policies. I mean, if you were in a position to now create a few policies that would actually really accelerate this transition towards both battery and e-mobility, what would those be? Like, can you list the top three that you would like to see?
Sure. So the first thing I would like to make sure is something is related to more about the financing, both from the stationary side as well as for the electric vehicle, and make the financing available for people who have the business case to adopt these technologies. The second one is around the manufacturing, which already is happening through PLI. Probably we need to scale that up. I think 50 gigawatt hour for India is too small of a market. So would like to see the expansion of the PLI scheme. And the third most thing I would say is that I think similar to in terms of the EV, where Niti Aayog came up and said that they are targeting at least 30% EV penetration by 2030, we need something similar in terms of the stationary storage target. In fact, earlier this year in May, when we celebrated 10th year anniversary of IESA, we have come up with the IESA vision document for 2030, where we have proposed the target of 160 gigawatt hour for stationary storage at grid scale in India to supplement the 500 gigawatt renewable target, which Honorable Prime Minister has already announced. So right now, this is being considered by Ministry of Power and MNRE and Prime Minister's Office. So the one big policy thing I would request is to have the national storage target with very clear roadmap in terms of how it is like year by year rollout is going to happen. Because the biggest challenge right now is everyone is very clear what's going to happen in 2030. But if you keep on like delaying the implementation by another 12 months, another 18 months for some reason or other, see, if you think of all the solar projects, the first solar projects which were done at 17 rupees, someone may claim, oh, that was like foolish. And if they had waited for another 5 years, they could have saved all those money. But if they would have waited for that, they would have never seen the prices coming down, right? The reason why the solar industry took off is because states like Gujarat and others ended up taking the foresight and enabling those projects to get implemented when prices were high. And if you think of it as a total, like those projects were only few hundred megawatt of projects, which now in a 100 gigawatt project, if you see in terms of the load weighted average of the prices, that 17 rupee will not even have an increase of like 1 paise or 2 paise as a total cost increase when you're considering 100 gigawatt solar being deployed. Same thing will happen for this. We right now need a lot of work on skill development, on capacity building. It is not about just manufacturing batteries in some gigafactory. You need to have a lot of capabilities in terms of the skilled manpower in designing the systems, doing system integration, implementing those, operating those, ensuring safety of those. So a lot of these aspects require work at hundreds of different companies across the SME sector around the country. And you cannot do that type of a skill development and capability building overnight. So it is very important that we don't wait for this to happen something in 2030. We need to start doing something right now in next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 36 months. So there needs to be a very proper scale up of these deployments happening over next 6 to 8 years.
That's a very positive outlook. Thank you so much. And I'm amazed we covered so much ground in this: tech, policy, global markets, Indian markets, EV, everything. Thank you. And it could have been just expected from you only. So thank you so much.
And I also want to thank you, Rahul. This has been really good. I really like your optimism, but you're also frank about the challenges. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the India Energy Hour. Subscribe to this channel to never miss an update. To drop us a feedback, visit our website or write to us at theindiaenergyhour@gmail.com. We are on Twitter. You can follow at TIEH_podcast and get in touch with the two hosts at Shreya_Jay and at Sandeep Pai with double I.